I stood there in my childhood home, wine dripping from my trembling hand onto the Persian rug my mother cherished more than she ever cherished me, watching my sister Sarah's designer white dress bloom with crimson stains like blood on snow. The entire room had gone silent. 200 pairs of eyes belonging to Newport's elite were fixed on me. My mother's mouth hung open in shock. My father's face had turned purple with rage. And my sister, my darling baby sister, who I had protected and loved for 28 years, was screaming like I had physically assaulted her. What they didn't know yet was that this was just the beginning. What they couldn't possibly imagine was that in less than 10 minutes, every lie, every manipulation, every cruel dismissal of my existence would be projected in high definition for everyone to see. Because you see, 5 years ago when I designed the smart home security system for this Newport mansion, I made sure I kept admin access. Forever. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you want to know how the invisible daughter became the woman who burned her family's empire to the ground, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me if you've ever been the scapegoat in your family. This story starts long before that Christmas Eve, back where when I still believed that if I just tried hard enough, loved hard enough, sacrificed enough, my family might finally see me as something more than a disappointment. Let me take you back to where it really began. I was 7 years old the first time I realised my parents loved Sarah more than they loved me. It was my birthday, and I had been so excited because Mum promised we would go to the aquarium. I loved marine life, could name every species of shark, dreamed of designing buildings that could coexist with ocean ecosystems. But that morning, 3-year-old Sarah threw a tantrum about wanting to go to the toy store instead. Without hesitation, without even a moment of consideration, my mother cancelled the aquarium trip. We spent my birthday at FAO Schwartz watching Sarah pick out dolls I wasn't allowed to touch. When I cried in the car on the way home, my father told me I was being selfish. Big sisters, he said, are supposed to be understanding. That was the first lesson. There would be many more. Growing up in the Sterling family meant understanding your place in the hierarchy. At the top was my grandmother Rose, the family matriarch, whose old money built the foundation of our fortune. Then came my father Robert, whose mediocre business sense was propped up by his inheritance and his wife's social connections. My mother Patricia was a former beauty queen who treated life like an extended pageant, where appearances were everything. And then there was Sarah, the golden child, the perfect daughter, beautiful and charming, joy, and utterly ruthless in ways our parents chose not to see. I was the spare, the plain one, the serious one, the one who got good grades because what else did I have to offer? I threw myself into my studies into architecture and design, hoping that achievement might earn me the love that seemed to flow so effortlessly to Sarah. I paid for my own college education through scholarships and part-time jobs because my parents spent my college fund on Sarah's debut into society. When I graduated top of my class from MIT, my parents didn't attend the ceremony because it conflicted with Sarah's sorority formal. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was building something bigger than their approval. I started my own architectural firm specialising in sustainable design and smart home integration. I worked 80-hour weeks. I built a reputation. I made my own money and bought my own small apartment in Boston. I stopped expecting anything from them and tried to build a life where their neglect couldn't touch me. But blood is strange. It pulls at you even when you know better. So when my father called 3 years ago asking me to design a comprehensive smart home system for their Newport estate, I said yes. When he balked at the price quotes from established companies, I offered to do it at cost. When he suggested I do it for free, as a way to pay back everything they'd invested in raising me, I swallowed my anger and agreed. I spent 6 months of weekends installing cameras, programming security systems, integrating everything from the lighting to the temperature controls to the entertainment systems. I kept the admin access. I told myself it was just professional practice maintaining access to systems I built. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I think I knew I might need it someday. 2 years ago, I met Jack. He came to a tech conference where I was speaking about sustainable architecture integration with AI systems. He was tall, quiet, intense in a way that made you want to know what he was thinking. He approached me after my presentation with thoughtful questions about encryption and security protocols. We got coffee. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into late-night conversations that stretched until dawn. Jack Vance was nothing like the men my family would have chosen for me. He'd grown up poor in Detroit, put himself through school while working night shifts as a security guard, built his company from nothing. Titan Security started as a one-man operation and grew into something formidable. He understood code the way I understood design. He saw systems where others saw chaos. And he saw me in a way no one else ever had. When he proposed 6 months into our relationship, I said yes before he finished the question. I wanted to share this joy with my family despite everything. I wanted them to meet this incredible man who loved me. So I did everything right. I sent formal engagement announcements on cream-coloured cardstock with embossed lettering. I followed up with phone calls. And then 4 months before our wedding, I sent the actual invitations. They were beautiful. I designed them myself platinum ink on handmade paper delivered via FedEx overnight in boxes lined with silver tissue. I spent $2,000 on my family's invitations alone, making sure they were perfect, making sure they were worthy of the sterling name. I included handwritten notes for each family member. For my parents, I wrote about how much it would mean to have them there. For Sarah, I wrote about wanting her as my maid of honor, about hoping this could be a new chapter for us as sisters. The invitations were delivered on a Tuesday morning in March. I tracked the packages obsessively. Signed for by Patricia Sterling at 9:42 a.m. Signed for by Sarah Sterling at 11:15 a.m. I waited for my phone to ring. I waited for the congratulations, the questions about dress colours and venue choices, the normal excitement that should accompany a daughter's wedding. Silence. 3 days passed. A week. 2 weeks. I called my mother. She said she'd been busy and would call me back. She never did. I called my father. He said something vague about checking their schedule. Sarah didn't respond to my calls or texts at all. Isabel. A month went by, then 2 months, then 3. I got married on a Saturday in June at a small vineyard in Napa Valley. 40 people attended, mostly Jack's family and colleagues, a handful of my friends. My family's seats remained empty. No one called to apologise or explain. It was as if I simply didn't exist. Jack held me while I cried on our wedding night. He promised me we would build our own family, better than the one I'd been born into. And we did. We bought a house with an ocean view. He expanded his business. I took on more interesting projects. We were happy, but there was always an ache, a confusion I couldn't fully resolve. What had I done that was so unforgivable that my own family wouldn't come to my wedding? I got my answer 6 months later in November, when a cream-coloured envelope arrived at my office. The return address was my parents' Newport estate. Inside was an invitation to Sarah's engagement party, scheduled for Christmas Eve. The party would also serve as the family's annual Christmas celebration. Black tie required. No plus ones mentioned for me, even though the invitation was addressed to Miss Emily Sterling, as if my marriage hadn't happened at all. I stared at that invitation for an hour. Part of me wanted to throw it away to finally cut these people out of my life completely. But another part of me, the part that was still that 7-year-old girl, hoping for a trip to the aquarium, wanted answers. I needed to understand. I needed to look them in the eye and ask them why. So I RSVP'd yes. I didn't mention Jack. I didn't ask questions. I simply checked the box and sent it back. The weeks leading up to Christmas Eve were strange. I went through the motions of my life, but my mind kept circling back to that party. Jack offered to come with me, but I told him no. I needed to do this alone. I needed to face them without anyone to hide behind. He didn't like it, but he understood. Instead, he made me promise to call him if things got ugly, and he arranged for his driver to be waiting nearby just in case. On December 24th, I put on a simple black dress, good quality but understated. I did my own makeup. I wore my wedding ring, a thin platinum band with a single diamond that Jack had chosen, because he said it reminded him of starlight. I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to know that someone found me worth loving, even if they didn't. The drive from Boston to Newport took 2 hours through thickening snow. Fat flakes fell steadily from a gunmetal sky coating everything in white. Christmas lights twinkled from the mansions lining the coast. Despite everything, Newport at Christmas was beautiful. It always had been. When I was little, before I understood what my place in the family really was, Christmas Eve was magical. Hot chocolate and carols, the smell of pine and cinnamon, my grandmother telling stories by the fireplace while snow fell outside the windows. I wondered if Grandmother Rose would be there tonight. She was 92 now, fierce and sharp despite her age. She'd always been easier on me than my parents were, though she'd never interfered with how they raised us. Sterling women, she used to say, were survivors. I hadn't understood what she meant then. The estate looked like something from a fairy tale when I pulled up to the gate. Every window glowed with warm light, garlands wrapped the columns, an enormous wreath hung on the front door. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway. I recognized some of them belonging to my parents' wealthy friends, the kind of people who measured worth in stock portfolios and social connections. I sat in my modest sedan for a long moment watching the snow accumulate on my windshield. I could still leave. I could still drive away and never look back. But I didn't. I took a deep breath, grabbed my purse and stepped out into the cold. The front door opened before I could knock. One of the catering staff, a young man in a black suit, greeted me warmly and took my coat. Music and laughter drifted from the main living room. I followed the sound, my heels clicking on the marble floor I'd walked 1,000 times as a child. The living room was packed with people in evening wear, champagne flutes in hand. The enormous Christmas tree in the corner dripping with ornaments and lights. A fire roared in the fireplace. Waiters circulated with trays of canapes. It was exactly the kind of party my mother excelled at throwing, all elegance and expense and careful curation. I saw Sarah first. She stood in the centre of the room, like a princess holding court, wearing a white cocktail dress that probably cost more than my car payment. Her blonde hair was styled in perfect waves. A massive diamond sparkled on her left hand. She was laughing at something someone said, her face bright and animated. She saw me the moment I stepped into view. Her laughter cut off abruptly. Her eyes narrowed. And then, instead of coming to greet me, instead of even acknowledging me like a normal person would acknowledge their sister, she grabbed the arm of the man next to her, whispered something in his ear, and they both turned to stare at me. The man must have been Julian, her fiancé. Tall, handsome in a generic way, wearing an expensive suit with the ease of someone born into money. He looked me up and down with barely concealed confusion, as if he couldn't quite figure out who I was or why I was there. My mother materialized at Sarah's other side. Patricia Sterling looked exactly as she always did, perfectly, coiffed, wearing a designer gown in champagne silk. Her face carefully composed into an expression of mild surprise that I knew was completely calculated. She didn't come to me. She didn't welcome me. She just stood there with Sarah, whispering something that made Sarah's smile turn sharp and cruel. I forced myself to walk toward them, past clusters of guests who were starting to notice the strange tension. My father appeared from somewhere near the bar, his face already flushed with alcohol, even though it was barely 7 p.m. When I reached them, there was a beat of awkward silence. Finally, my mother spoke. Her voice was cool, polite, the tone she used with the help, not the tone she used with daughters. My stomach dropped, but I kept my face neutral. I'd learned long ago how to hide pain from these people. I extended my hand to Julian, forcing a smile. He shook it with the limp, brief grip of someone who'd already been told I wasn't important. Sarah was practically vibrating with some kind of suppressed excitement, and that should have been my warning. That should have told me to turn around and walk out right then. But I didn't. Sarah's voice rang out across the room, cutting through conversations, drawing attention. The room began to quiet. People turned to look. Sarah grabbed my arm with surprising strength and pulled me further into the centre of the living room, right in front of the enormous television mounted above the fireplace. My heart started to pound. This felt wrong. Everything about this felt wrong. But I was surrounded by people, now hemmed in by curious faces and expensive perfume. Sarah released my arm and practically danced over to the television, grabbing a remote from a side table. Her smile was huge, genuine in its cruelty. The television flickered to life. A slideshow began to play. Photos of Sarah through the years. Beautiful. Sarah laughing. Sarah at her college graduation. Sarah at charity galas. Sentimental music played. Some people in the crowd made appreciative noises. Then the photos changed. Pictures of me now, but different. Awkward middle school photos. A particularly unflattering picture from my college years, where I was exhausted and unphotogenic. A photo of my small Boston apartment that someone must have taken through the window. Each image was paired with caption in Comic Sans font, the kind of font that itself felt like mockery. The crowd was laughing, now uncomfortable laughter, but laughter nonetheless. My face burned. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to process what was happening. The final slide appeared. It was a screenshot of a dating app interface, one of those desperate-looking sites for older singles. Photoshopped onto it was my face with the logo reading, "Last Chance for Desperate Women," in garish pink letters. The tagline below read, "Where hope goes to die." The room erupted in laughter. Not everyone. Some people looked uncomfortable, but enough. Enough that the sound surrounded me, pressed in on me, made my skin crawl. Sarah turned to face me, her smile radiant with malice. She pulled a small wrapped box from behind her back and thrust it toward me. My mother's voice joined in from somewhere behind me, saccharine, sweet and poisonous. I looked at that box in Sarah's outstretched hand. I looked at the television screen still displaying my face on that humiliating fake profile. I looked at my mother and father, both watching me with expressions of mild amusement, as if this was entertaining rather than devastating. I looked at my grandmother Rose in her chair by the fireplace, her face unreadable but her eyes sharp and watching. Something crystallized in that moment, some final illusion shattered. They would never love me. They would never respect me. To them, I would always be the disappointing older daughter whose only purpose was to make Sarah look better by comparison. I was done. I took the box from Sarah's hand. She looked triumphant. Then I dropped it on the floor, the sound of it hitting marble, echoing in the sudden quiet. I walked calmly to the bar, picked up a glass of red wine. The bartender handed it to me with a slightly worried expression. I walked back to Sarah, standing in her pristine white dress, still smiling because she thought she'd won. I threw the wine directly in her face. Red liquid splashed across white fabric, across her perfect hair, dripped down her shocked expression. The glass slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor. The sound seemed impossibly loud. Time seemed to freeze. The entire room held its breath. Sarah just stood there, red wine streaming down her face and soaking into her expensive white dress. Her mouth hung open in complete shock. Then she let out a scream that could wake the dead. It was a piercing, furious shriek that seemed to rattle the chandelier above us. I didn't flinch. When I spoke, my voice cut through her, screaming like ice through water. All hell broke loose. My father charged toward me with his hand raised, ready to strike. But Julian was quicker. He stepped between us, blocking my father's path. Despite his confusion about what was happening, something in him knew hitting me would be wrong. My mother's voice was shrill, rising above the chaos. I didn't back down. I didn't flinch. Every eye in that room was on me now, but I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. My voice rang out clear and steady, years of hurt and anger and disappointed hope compressed into those words. My father tried to push past Julian, his face now a dangerous shade of red. My grandmother's walking stick struck the floor with a sharp crack that somehow cut through all the noise. Rose Sterling stood up from her chair with the kind of authority that came from decades of commanding rooms, just like this one. Her voice, though aged, carried power. Sarah had been dabbing uselessly at her dress with napkins, crying with rage. But at my grandmother's words, she looked up with wild eyes. Everyone was talking at once now. My mother insisting I was lying, that I was mentally unstable, that I'd always been jealous of Sarah. My father demanding I be removed from the house. Sarah crying and screaming about how I was trying to ruin her special day. Guests murmuring to each other, some looking at me with pity, others with contempt, everyone loving the drama of it all. My grandmother's voice cut through again. My father straightened his jacket, trying to regain some composure. He was still talking, still trying to gaslight everyone in that room when every light in the house went out. The sudden darkness was complete, except for the glow of the fireplace. Someone gasped. Then gradually, emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in an eerie blue-white glow. The television above the fireplace flickered and came back to life, but not with Sarah's slideshow. A voice filled the room, coming from the surround sound speakers that I had personally installed throughout the house. A voice I knew as well as my own. My husband's voice. Jack's voice. Calm professional with an undercurrent of steel. The television screen showed a desktop interface, now clearly someone accessing the system remotely. My family's smart home system, the one I'd built now, completely under someone else's control. I felt a smile tug at my lips for the first time that evening. I raised my voice so everyone could hear me clearly. Several people near me stepped back instinctively. My father's face went from red to white. Jack's voice came through the speakers again. The screen changed. Suddenly, we were looking at security camera footage from 8 months ago. The timestamp was clearly visible. The location was right here, this house, the front entrance. On screen, we watched as a FedEx driver handed a package to someone who opened the door. The camera angle was perfect, showing everything in clear detail. The person receiving the package was Sarah. She signed for it, took the box, examined the return address. Even from the camera angle, you could see the moment she recognized my name. Her expression changed from curiosity to something ugly. The footage continued. Sarah carried the box to this very living room. She opened it carefully, pulling out the platinum invitation. She read it, and even though there was no audio, her contemptuous expression said everything. She looked at the invitation like it was garbage. Then she did something I never would have imagined. She walked to the fireplace, the same fireplace that was currently crackling behind us, and held the invitation over the flames. She pulled out her phone, positioned it to record herself, and set the invitation on fire. We watched it curl and blacken and turn to ash. We watched her laugh silently as it burned. And then we watched her open her phone, type something, and hit send. The screen split. Next to the footage of Sarah burning my wedding invitation, her Instagram story from that same day appeared. There she was in the video she'd posted, holding the burning invitation and laughing. The caption she'd written appeared at the bottom. The room was dead silent except for the crackling of the fire. On screen, Sarah dropped the ashes into the fireplace and dusted off her hands, looking pleased with herself. I turned to look at my sister. She'd gone pale beneath the wine stains on her face and hair. Her mouth was opening and closing, but no sound was coming out. Julian had taken several steps away from her, staring at her with dawning horror. My mother tried to recover. Jack's voice interrupted her. The screen changed again. Now we were looking at email correspondence. The sender was my mother, Patricia Sterling. The recipient was my father, Robert Sterling. The date was 3 days after my wedding invitations had been delivered. The subject line read, "Re Emily's situation." Jack read it aloud, his voice neutral, but each word landing like a hammer blow. My grandmother's walking stick, hit the floor so hard I thought it might crack the marble. Her face had gone rigid with fury. She was staring at my mother with an expression I'd never seen before. Something beyond anger, beyond disappointment. Betrayal, I realised. She felt betrayed. But we weren't done. The screen changed one more time. Now it showed a professional profile, the kind you might find on LinkedIn or a corporate website. A photograph of Jack in a sharp suit standing in front of a modern office building. Jack's voice came through the speakers again, and this time there was a hint of dark amusement in his tone. The profile on screen detailed his company Titan Security, founded 8 years ago now, one of the most successful cybersecurity and corporate security firms in the country. Recent acquisitions, board memberships, and there highlighted in red the most recent news item. Titan Security acquires 40% stake in Whitmore Properties valued at $200 million. Whitmore Properties, Julian's family company. Julian made a strangled sound. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, obviously checking something, confirming what he was seeing. The colour drained from his face. He turned to my father, his voice hoarse. My father's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He looked like a fish drowning in air. Julian's voice grew stronger, though there was a tremor in it. I spoke up, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. Sarah made a sound like a wounded animal. She lunged at me, hands outstretched like she was going to claw my eyes out. Julian caught her, wrestling her back. She fought against him, screaming incoherently, mascara running down her face in black streaks mixed with wine. Julian's face was carved from stone now. He pulled the engagement ring off Sarah's finger with one sharp motion. She shrieked and tried to hold on to it, but he was stronger. The massive diamond caught the light as he pocketed it. His voice was arctic cold now, nothing like the pleasant man who'd greeted guests earlier. My father tried to stand, reaching out a hand toward Julian, his face desperate. Julian ignored him. He turned to look at me, and I saw something like respect in his eyes for the first time that evening. He turned and walked out. Several other guests followed him, wanting nothing to do with the unfolding disaster. The room erupted in chaos. My mother was crying. My father was shouting. Sarah had collapsed onto the floor, still screaming. Other guests were whispering frantically, phones appearing as people started texting and calling, spreading the scandal in real time. Through it all, my grandmother sat perfectly still, watching. Finally, she rose to her feet, using her cane for support. The room gradually quieted as people noticed her standing. Rose Sterling commanded respect, even at 92, even in the middle of catastrophe. Her voice when she spoke could have cut glass. She turned to look at Sarah, still sobbing on the floor in her ruined dress. Then she turned to me. Her expression softened just slightly. Just enough. I felt something loosen in my chest. Permission. Release. I nodded to her words caught in my throat. I walked toward the front door, past clusters of guests who parted for me like I was toxic. Past my mother who was clutching my father's arm and sobbing. Past the catering staff who were trying to look busy and invisible. Past all of it, the front door opened and cold air hit my face. Snow was falling harder now, fat flakes swirling in the wind. And there, at the bottom of the steps, was a Rolls-Royce Phantom in glossy black. The rear door opened and Jack stepped out. He was tall and solid and real in a way nothing in that house had ever been real. He wore a dark coat and carried an umbrella. He walked up the steps to me, opened the umbrella over both of us, and draped his own coat around my shoulders without a word. I looked up at him and saw such fierce pride and love in his eyes that I almost started crying right there. I managed to smile. We walked to the car together. Jack held the door for me, and I slid into the warm interior. He walked around to the other side, but before getting in, he looked back at the house. Several faces were visible in the windows watching us. Security cameras that I knew were streaming everything back to the living room TV were mounted above the door. Jack's voice carried clearly through the cold night air, loud enough for anyone watching to hear. Then, he got in the car and we drove away. I didn't look back. Not once. 3 months later, I stood in my kitchen making coffee while Jack read the morning paper at our dining table. Our house was nothing like the Newport mansion. It was smaller, modern, all clean lines and windows overlooking the Pacific. We'd bought it 6 months after getting married, and it was the first place that ever felt like home to me. The morning news was playing on the television in the living room, and Jack had turned up the volume when he heard something interesting. I carried our coffee mugs over and sat down next to him, looking at the screen. The headline read Sterling Properties Files. Chapter 11. Bankruptcy. There was a photo of my father looking haggard, walking out of a courthouse with lawyers surrounding him. The reporter detailed how a series of bad investments, combined with the loss of several major contracts and the public scandal from Christmas Eve, had caused the company to collapse. Investors had pulled funding. Partners had withdrawn. The whole house of cards had tumbled down. A second story followed this one about Sarah. Apparently, the video of her burning my wedding invitation had gone viral after someone at the party posted it online. Fashion brands she'd worked with as an influencer had dropped her. She'd been disinvited from various charity boards. The Instagram post where she'd mocked me had been screenshot and shared millions of times, held up as an example of the cruelty of the wealthy elite. Jack glanced at me over his reading glasses. I took a sip of coffee, thinking about it. Did I feel sorry for them? For the way their world had crumbled? For my father's business failing? For Sarah's reputation in ruins? For my mother's social standing destroyed? I smiled at Jack, the man who saw me, who valued me, who loved me enough to help me take back my power. I picked up the remote and turned off the television. Outside our windows, the ocean sparkled in morning sunlight. We had plans today, normal happy plans. Brunch with friends, a walk on the beach. Maybe we'd work on designs for the new sustainable housing project I'd been commissioned to lead. Maybe we'd just exist together in our beautiful home, in our beautiful life, in the peace we'd built. The past was behind me. The people who hurt me couldn't touch me anymore. I had drawn my boundaries with fire and wine and truth, and I was finally completely free. Some people might say I went too far, that I was cruel, that I should have taken the high road, forgiven, moved on quietly. But here's what I learned. Sometimes the high road is just another word for letting people walk all over you. Sometimes boundaries need to be drawn with a sledgehammer rather than a pencil. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to burn down the prison they built around you, even if they're standing inside it. I spent 28 years trying to earn love from people who are incapable of giving it. I sacrificed my own peace, my own happiness, my own sense of worth at the altar of their approval. And you know what I got for it? A dating app subscription for desperate women presented as a gift at Christmas. So no, I don't regret what I did. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that I didn't see the truth sooner. But I don't regret standing up for myself, and I don't regret letting them face the consequences of their own cruelty. If you're out there and someone in your life treats you like you're less than, like you're not worthy of basic respect and love, I want you to hear this. You deserve better. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be valued. And if the people who are supposed to love you can't do that, you have every right to walk away. You have every right to protect yourself. You have every right to burn it all down and build something better from the ashes. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been the invisible child in your family, the one who was expected to sacrifice everything, while someone else got all the love and attention? Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to save yourself? Drop a comment and tell me your story. And if this resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe, because I'm just getting started sharing stories about taking back your power. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building a life so beautiful, so peaceful, so authentically yours, that the people who try to dim your light become irrelevant. It's choosing yourself when no one else will. It's walking out of the darkness and into the sun. And trust me, the view from here is spectacular.